Amen. So once again, my name is Pastor Dan Forehand, and I serve as assistant to the bishop here in the Indiana-Kentucky Synod. I bring you greetings this day from our bishop, Bill Guffian, from our bishop-elect, who was elected last weekend, Tim Graham, who will begin his service as bishop on September 1st, the rest of the Synod staff, and the other 170 congregations that make up this Indiana-Kentucky mission territory. Thank you as well for the ways that you partner with us in this mission through your mission support. One of the most impactful worship services of the entire year for me is called the Easter Vigil. Do you all do an Easter Vigil? Yes, all right. So the Easter Vigil, you know, it's this tradition that happens, it's the Saturday between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Oftentimes, traditionally, people are baptized at this service. We light candles, we smell Easter flowers, and in some places, they even serve champagne. Do you serve champagne at your vigil? No. Well, maybe next year. Any excuse for a party, right? But the Easter Vigil, as you know, can take some time. It's not uncommon for this service to be several hours long because there are lots and lots of elements to it. Lots and lots and lots of readings. Some vigils have 4 or 5. Many have 7. Some have 12. Others have even more than that. And there are these great stories of our faith, these great stories from the Old Testament that talk about how God is making promises with humanity, with you and me, to deliver us from our places of death and despair into what will be the resurrection and the proclamation that Jesus has risen. And one of those readings from the Easter Vigil is the one we had this morning as we continue this series, Retold, Sunday School Stories You Thought You Knew, from Daniel chapter 3. And we get to meet the lovable characters of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these guys, they join the long list of greats that come in packages of 3, like Huey, Dewey, and Louie, like Larry, Curly, and Moe, the 3 Amigos, the 3 Musketeers, the list goes on and on. These 3 guys are faithful to their God, and their faithfulness, as the story tells us, should have cost them their lives in the fiery furnace at the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar. It's an interesting story that we often talk about in terms of how are we faithful to God and how is God faithful to us. But I've always wondered this. If it had just been Shadrach by himself, or if it had just been Meshach by himself, or Abednego all by himself with no friends alongside of him. Not 3, but if there had just been 1 who had been faithful. Could they individually have been as bold to stand up to the king if they didn't have each other? They are, in so many ways, so interconnected that we never read their names individually. Over and over again in the story, it's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're attached to the hip, almost literally, it seems. They are inseparable. They are together in the best and strongest sense of that word. And they have God with them as the 4th strand to bring them together. It's interesting, I see more and more people, more and more pastors, more and more of all of us trying to go at it alone these days. We say that we don't need each other. Our society tends to not trust each other. We tend to glorify independence. I can do this by myself. And if we see people, we see them as a means to use to push ourselves forward. But this story from Daniel This story speaks of our interconnectedness, of our need to walk this journey of faith not by ourselves, but with other people, of the ways that we are much stronger and more complete when we have other people around us. And as much as this story is about obedience to God and the promise of deliverance by God from the fiery furnace, I think there's a reminder that we are created for community. And the Easter Vigil, where we read this story, is all about interconnectedness. We light candles from one another, making sure the lit candle always stays up to not drip wax on our neighbor. We are in moments of darkness relying on each other to walk the path. We need different voices to read these great stories. We are connected. So let's say that you are Shadrach as the light comes upon us. Who's your Meshach? And who is your Abednego? Maybe they're sitting next to you in the form of a spouse, a child, a parent, or a friend. Maybe they're folks from a different congregation or a different community, but you know that when life gets challenging or when life gets really great, you can call them up, you can visit them, and weep together or celebrate together or be together in whatever way the time calls for. Or maybe you're not sure quite yet. Maybe you've been going at it alone. You're still on the journey to find those folks who will ride with you into the fiery furnace, who will give you strength and courage, who will bring a smile to your face, who will point you to Jesus. And if that's you, if you're not completely sure who those folks are, that's okay. You aren't alone in that. I guess there are many folks who have not yet found their friends for this adventure of faith. And maybe they're just waiting for an invitation. In my faithful imagination, I imagine and see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego just randomly meeting together sometime. Maybe it was at their place of worship, maybe it was on the street, and just talking to each other. Because they weren't always Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were different, separate people at one point. They were brought together for a purpose. And it's a purpose we read about these thousands of years later. And if thinking about these people from thousands of years ago is too abstract for you, maybe we can think about it this way. I have a 6 and a 4-year-old at home. And do you remember when someone was mean to you on the playground? Now, there are a few of us who are brave enough or crazy enough to just go up and confront that bully. But for my girls, for me, for most of us, we get scared, we get nervous, we get overwhelmed. And so we try to get others on our side because it's always easier to confront the bullies of this world when we're not alone. And that's what the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is all about. That's what they come together in this little community to confront the bully of King Nebuchadnezzar together. And it brings us to this fundamental gospel truth. You are not alone. I am not alone. We are not alone. We have the power, the gift, the love, the grace, the peace, the strength, the courage that comes from Jesus, given to you and to me as a gift of love. And when we find our Meshach and Abednego, when we find others to sit alongside of us, that's just icing on the cake. Because the Easter Vigil ends with this joyous party and proclamation that Jesus has risen just as he said he would, that death and the powers of evil have been defeated, that we have hope and a purpose, and we have been redeemed. And we shout hallelujah, we ring bells, we laugh, we celebrate, we might even drink champagne, and the promise of new life is ours. And we do that in community together. Sometimes at the end of that story, we hear Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and the fourth person who, as the writer says, looks like one of their gods, are walking about in the furnace. Some of our Jewish sisters and brothers like to say that they're dancing in the furnace, which may be a more faithful response. Because we're called to dance together in the good times, to dance together in the hard times, to be together because we know that God is with us. And so as we hear this great story, the story retold from our Sunday school days about God delivering these three friends from a fiery furnace, may we think about them together in community, imagining the great gift that they are for each other in their times of needs. And may we see it in ourselves too, giving thanks to God for those who walk alongside of us, who strengthen us in our faith. And when it's called for, being that for others too, being the ones to point to the love of God in all things. As we together as the people of God embrace the gift of Jesus, who walks and dances alongside of us every step of our lives. There is abundant good news in this story from Daniel chapter 3, the story of fiery furnace and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. God delivers us, and that's why we read it on Easter, at the Easter Vigil. God is with us, and God is in each and every one of us. Thanks be to God. Amen.